Today, I'm talking about The Martian. The book was written by Andy Weir in 2011 and adapted for the big screen in 2015. It's about a man who gets stranded on Mars and his struggle to stay alive. Was the movie true to the book? Were there major changes? Keep watching and I'll tell you everything. Hey there, I'm Jessica, and this is Bookshelf to Big Screen. If you're new to the channel, I take a look at books that have been adapted to the big or small screen and compare the differences between the two. So if you're the kind of person who loves to know what changes were made in the movie or if the book really was better, be sure to subscribe. Real quick, if you want to avoid any spoilers, watch for this. I'll have it up during any revealing parts, and in the event you want to wait and read or watch for yourself, you can just skip forward until it's gone. Mark Watney is an astronaut who is on a 2-month mission on Mars called Ares 3, but his trip is cut short when a bad sandstorm hits and his crew must evacuate. On the way to the ascent vehicle, a communications antenna breaks off and knocks Mark away from his crew. Commander Lewis takes all the time she possibly can to try and find him, but she must eventually make the hard decision to leave Mark in order for the rest of them to survive. Mark is the crew's mechanical engineer, and his secondary task was as botanist, which makes him especially well suited to be the person who was stranded on Mars. The movie begins with the very dramatic escape from Mars, followed by a news conference where NASA announces Mark's death. Then we finally see that Mark has survived. He's hurt, but he manages to get back to the hab and patch himself up. In the book, we're primarily learning about what's happening by reading Mark's mission logs. I like that the movie did these as video logs, which gives us an opportunity to hear Mark's retelling of events the way that we do in the book. So there's a nice combination of seeing things as they happen and experiencing Mark's logs, because as Mark essentially talks more and more to himself in these logs, we get to see how funny he is despite his current situation. One thing I think that the book does better is give pretty detailed explanations of how and why things happened, which doesn't always happen in the movie. As an example, the book explains how his suit maintained air pressure even though it had been pierced by an antenna, whereas the movie does not. In the movie, the first thing Mark does is an inventory of food and supplies. He has food for about 400 days, but needs to survive for 4 years, which is when the next mission's crew would get there. Fortunately, he's a botanist, so he figures out a way to plant potatoes on Mars. He essentially creates a greenhouse inside the hab and uses his own waste to create fertile soil. In order to create enough water, he takes hydrazine from the descent vehicle, separates into N2 and H2, and then burns the hydrogen to make water. The problem is that this is pretty dangerous and he ends up blowing himself up a little because he forgot to account for the excess oxygen he was exhaling. Once he gets it right, it seems like he leaves this water-making rig up the entire time. In the book, Mark uses the hydrazine to make water, but the whole process is way more complicated. First of all, Mark doesn't do the whole greenhouse setup, but he does fill every usable surface inside the hab with dirt, including the empty crew bunks. He determines that he needs 250 liters of water for his plants, so he's not endlessly creating water the way he seems to be in the movie. On his first attempt, Mark wears the lining of his EVA suit and an oxygen mask as a precaution. He's successful, but after a few days, he realizes there's not as much water as he calculated and discovers that he hasn't been burning all the hydrogen, which means the hab has become a giant hydrogen bomb. He sleeps in the rover until he figures out how to resolve the issue by pulling oxygen out of the hab, setting the hab temperature to 1 degree Celsius so the bacteria in the soil doesn't die, bagging the plants and moving them to the rover, and then slowly burning off the hydrogen by adding short bursts of oxygen and producing a spark with wires and a battery. And this is when he accidentally blows himself up. But it's a lot more hectic, and he spends another night in the rover before going back into the hab to figure it all out. In the movie, back on Earth, there's a memorial service for Mark, and then we're introduced to Vincent Kapoor, the director of Mars missions at NASA. He wants authorization to use the satellites to see what resources are left to try and get funding for a new mission by proposing savings on materials that are already on Mars. Teddy, the director of NASA, refuses to let him use the satellites to look at the location where Mark is because he's afraid that the public will be able to see Mark's dead body. Vincent is able to convince him and emails Mindy in satellite communications the coordinates for her to capture images. While she's doing that, she notices that the rover has moved and realizes Mark must be alive. She calls Vincent, and he brings in Teddy and Annie, the director of media relations, to decide what to do next. Annie says they have to release the images to the public within 24 hours. Teddy says to release them with a statement and that he doesn't want to tell the Ares crew yet because they still have 10 months left to get back to Earth, and he wants them focused. In the book, his name is Venkat Kapoor, but this mostly happens the same. Venkat, Teddy, and Annie meet without Mindy. Venkat is with Teddy in the decision to keep the news from the Ares crew, but Annie can't imagine how they can keep it from them. Teddy says they'll control all communication the crew receives to prevent them from finding out. In the movie, Mark has to figure out how to get to the Ares 4 mission site, which means he has to be able to live in the rover for a very long time to get there. He does several tests trying to get the most distance out of the rover battery. He ends up digging up the radioactive generator and driving with it inside the rover to save from using battery power to heat the rover. He does his first successful potato harvest, but still needs to find a way to communicate with NASA. So he decides to go find the Mars Pathfinder and Sojourner. He hops in the rover, digs it up, loads it on the rover, and brings it back to the hab. Back on Earth, NASA's trying to figure out how to talk to him, how to keep him alive, and how they can get him off the planet. Bruce, director of JPL, is tasked with getting more supplies to Mark in 3 months, which would normally take 15 months. Mitch, the Hermes flight director, is mad that they still haven't told the crew that Mark is alive. Teddy says they'll tell them once they have a plan to save Mark. In the book, again, there is incredible detail on how Mark does all the things that the movie just doesn't capture. There are 2 rovers, and he does a ton of modifications to make one rover as efficient for traveling long distances as possible. He also has to rig the rover to carry solar panels so that he can recharge the batteries along the way, because it takes him several days to reach Pathfinder. Also, navigation to Pathfinder is extremely tricky because he's relying solely on the geography of the planet. The rover doesn't have that super handy crane like in the movie, so he has to leave part of the Pathfinder and build a dirt ramp to get it onto the rover. In the movie, NASA is incredibly excited once they figure out Mark is heading for Pathfinder and begin working on how to communicate with him. Once Mark gets Pathfinder working, he sets up signs and officially has contact with NASA. He decides to use a hexadecimal system so they can communicate more efficiently. Then NASA is able to send him code to hack the rover so it can talk to Pathfinder, meaning he'll be able to use the communication system inside the rover to talk to NASA more easily. This is when Mark finds out they haven't told the crew that he's alive. So now they finally agree to tell the crew, who take the news about as well as can be expected. In the book, this all happens, but it just takes a little longer and, again, is slightly more complicated. Mark is unable to use his marker outside, so he scratches the messages from NASA out in the dirt and uses a camera to take pictures, which he can then take back into the hab and decode later. Before the crew is told about Mark, we finally get the play-by-play on what actually happened the day that Mark got stranded. This is how the movie started, but it's not until this part of the book that we actually get the full account of that day. The difference here, I think, makes for a stronger impact on how difficult it must be for the crew and Commander Lewis specifically to hear the news that they left Mark behind. In the movie, Mark has another setback when there's a breach in the airlock. He has to patch up his suit with some duct tape and then goes to see the damage in the hab. He sees that his plants are all dead and then grabs another suit and goes to the rover. This means NASA has to get the supplies to Mark even sooner than expected. Mark is able to repair the hab and take an inventory to calculate how much food he has left. The book spends a little time discussing the materials used to construct the hab and kind of builds up to this moment when the airlock goes flying away from the hab with Mark inside, and the initial damage is much worse. He has a gash on his forehead from the entirely broken faceplate, and there's a leak in the airlock, which is described as being phone booth sized. He burns some of his hair to use the smoke to locate the breach in the airlock, and then uses duct tape to seal that. Then he cuts one of the arms off of his suit and uses that material to patch his broken faceplate. He uses his patch kit to seal the armhole and fix his faceplate. Now the suit will hold up, but only for about 4 minutes. He's about 50 meters from the hab, so he throws himself against the wall of the airlock repeatedly to roll it closer to the hab so that he can get inside quickly in the amount of time that his suit will hold up. Once he's out, he has to use his arm camera to see because his faceplate is mostly covered with the suit material. He finds an extra suit, but it's pinned under a table and he's operating with one arm, so he quickly just takes the helmet and gets back to the rover. Without the hab, the Pathfinder doesn't have power, so the first thing he does is use rocks to write A-OK in Morse code to let NASA know that he's all right. Then he assesses all the damage, takes inventory, and fixes the hab. In the movie, NASA is trying to figure out how to get the supplies to Mark even sooner, since Mark will run out of food faster than they initially expected. So we're introduced to Rich Purnell in astrodynamics. He's responsible for calculating all the possible launch trajectories and orbits for the supply probe. NASA gets the time frame down to 15 days by cutting a bunch of safety protocols, and Mark needs to stretch his rations until then. But when NASA finally launches the probe, there's a problem, and the probe explodes. After Mark finds out the launch failed, he writes to Commander Lewis asking her to talk to his parents if he dies on Mars and to tell them about what he did. In the book, we get a full explanation as to what exactly went wrong with the supply probe launch, which had to do with the liquefaction of some of the food throwing off the balance. The NASA psychologist tells Mark to write personal messages to the entire crew to keep him tethered to humanity. These letters are peppered throughout the story until NASA comes up with the next plan. Martinez is the one that he asks to check in on his parents, and Mark asks him because he's his best friend. He tells Johansson that Commander Lewis told all the men that if any of them hit on her, they'd be off the mission, and that she was a huge nerd. He tells Vogel that he suspects he's a supervillain because he's a chemist with a German accent who had a base on Mars. He tells Beck that he should be honest with Johansson and tell her how he actually feels about her, but to wait until the mission is over so Commander Lewis doesn't kill him. Finally, he writes to Commander Lewis, first reassuring her that she made the right call in leaving him, but then ends on a light note by making fun of her love of disco music. In the movie, we see the chief scientist of the China National Space Administration watching news of the failed launch. This is actually where they explain what went wrong with the launch. The deputy chief scientist of the CNSA tells the chief that they have a booster that could reach Mars. The chief decides to reach out to NASA and tell them the CNSA will help. Now, JPL has to build another probe in less than a month. In the book, the director of the CNSA gives this a little more thought before he decides to help. First, he's thinking they'll need to be reimbursed for their rocket, but his deputy says it would be pointless because the state council would probably never approve the project again and just keep the money. So instead, they decide to trade the booster to NASA in exchange for a spot on the Ares 5 mission. This way, they get to publicly save the Americans and send a Chinese astronaut to Mars. In the movie, Rich has been working on something this whole time. After Rich goes to see him, Vincent calls a meeting with all the main players to tell them Rich's discovery. Rich says the plan to send the probe from China to Mars won't work. His idea is to have Hermes change its orbit and catch the probe from China, then head back to Mars. Hermes won't be able to land on Mars, so Mark will have to get to the Ares 4 site and use the ascent vehicle to get to the Hermes. NASA has to decide whether to send the probe to Mars as planned and have Mark wait until Ares 4 gets there to be rescued, or go with Rich's idea. Teddy decides to go ahead as originally planned, but Mitch is upset that Teddy's not letting the Ares 3 crew make that decision. In the book, Rich goes to Venkat, and then Venkat tells the others about the Rich Purnell maneuver. They get more into the specifics of what would be required to get Mark off of Mars for Hermes to intercept him in space, and the other things they would need to do for it to work. Venkat tells everyone to think about it for a day and then they'll make the final decision. When they reconvene, Teddy tells them that he's decided to go with the original plan. Mitch is big mad and says some things that you should probably never yell at your boss before storming off. Teddy apologizes to Annie for the outburst, and she says she was hoping Mitch would have kicked his ass and calls him a coward. In the movie, we see the crew on the Hermes. Vogel asks Johansson for help in opening an email attachment from his wife. Johansson discovers it's a text file, the Rich Purnell maneuver. The crew discusses whether or not they want to go against NASA and save Mark. They unanimously vote yes and send a message to NASA that says, Rich Purnell is a steely-eyed missile man, before they change their course to execute the new plan. In the book, the only real difference is that after they all vote yes, Commander Lewis gives them all 24 hours to change their minds before they go forward with the plan. Nobody changes their minds. In the movie, Teddy sits down with Mitch and tells him that Annie is going to announce NASA's decision to reroute Hermes to pick up Mark. He also says that he expects Mitch's resignation when this is all over. In the book, Mitch never admits fault of any kind. When Teddy says Annie is going to say it was NASA's plan, Mitch says that no one can get in trouble now, not even the crew for mutiny, because they were now just officially following NASA's orders. Teddy tells him that if he can ever prove that it was Mitch who sent the Rich Purnell maneuver to the crew, he'll find a way to fire him for it. In the movie, Mark is finally in on the new plan, and he has about 200 days to get everything ready to be able to get himself to the Ares 4 site and into space in time for the Hermes to catch him. Mark retrofits the rover according to NASA's specifications. The probe is successfully launched. Hermes picks it up without any issues, and they make their way to Mars. In the book, this process is not nearly as easy. While Mark is working on the rover, he inadvertently fries the circuits on the Pathfinder while using the drill on the rover. Now he has no more communications with NASA, and he has to figure everything out by himself again, which is all very complicated and technical. I mentioned earlier that there's 2 rovers and neither one has an extremely useful crane or flatbed like in the movie. He uses one of the rovers as a trailer and tows it with the other and retrofits them both to carry everything he needs to keep him alive. And he also figures out how to attach one of the tents so he'll essentially have a bedroom while he's on the road. He uses rocks along the way to leave Morse code messages that NASA can see with the satellites to at least be able to give them status updates. In the movie, 7 months pass, and Mark is finally ready to go to the Ares 4 site. He never loses communication with NASA, so he doesn't really face any other major issues. In the book, Mark has the issue of navigating again. At one point during his trip, NASA sees that a large dust storm is going to hit Mark, and they have no way of telling him. Also, it's so big that if he gets stuck in it, he'll be without sun too long and won't be able to charge the solar panels, and he'll die. Fortunately, Mark figures it all out on his own, figures out which way the storm is headed, and reroutes himself. The bad news is that he had to spend time going in both directions to figure out which way the storm was heading, and he has to take the long way to the site now. Then, right before he gets to the site, he has to descend into a crater and has major trouble. The first rover rolls onto its side and the tow clamp snapped, sending the second rover sliding all the way down where it completely flipped over at the bottom. Mark evaluates the situation and is remarkably able to get both rovers back up and running. He leaves a rock message for NASA and continues on his way. In the movie, the Hermes crew go over the plan and everyone's assigned roles, and there aren't really any issues with picking up the probe or getting to Mars. In the book, there's a few things about Hermes and the crew that don't make it into the movie. When the crew tell their families that they're going back for Mark, Johansson's dad is really worried about her. She finally tells him that he doesn't have to worry because even if something does go wrong, she'll survive. He doesn't quite get it, so she explains that before they picked up the probe, the crew discussed what to do if the pickup failed and they wouldn't have enough food. They decided that if there was only one person, there would be enough food to survive until Hermes got back to Earth, if you included the other people as a part of the food supply. Commander Lewis picked Johansson as the survivor because she's the smallest, and the rest of them would take pills and die. That's crazy. Also, things are breaking down on the ship, and the crew is just dealing with stuff as it happens. Climate control on the ship goes on the fritz and overheats Martinez's room. Commander Lewis tells Beck to move into Johansson's bunk because she knows they're already hooking up, and Martinez moves into Beck's room. In the movie, once Mark gets to the Ares 4 site, he starts making the modifications to the ascent vehicle so that he can reach the Hermes in space. In the book, Mark arriving at the Ares 4 site is even more exciting because of everything that he went through just to get there. Also, the ascent vehicle has communications with NASA, so he can finally talk to people again. NASA gives him all the specs and he starts preparing the ascent vehicle. He also has to create extra fuel by using his extra water and all his pee. Read the book if you want to know exactly how he does that. In the movie, once Mark finally gets into space, the Hermes is able to calculate the pickup trajectory. It turns out that they're a little too far away. Commander Lewis decides to accelerate to be able to reach him, but then they have to figure out how to slow down. Mark suggests that he can cut a hole in his suit and fly to them like Iron Man. Instead, Commander Lewis uses his idea and decides to blow an airlock on the ship to use the force to slow them down. Vogel builds a bomb, Johansson overrides the panel so the inner door won't close automatically, and Beck manually opens and locks the outer door from the outside. They'll still be just a little too far away, and Commander Lewis decides that she'll be the one to go out and catch Mark instead of Beck. Mark ends up using his Iron Man idea after all. Commander Lewis nearly misses him, but Mark manages to hold on and they get him back to the ship safely. Everyone goes nuts. In the book, this all happens mostly the same. The crew blow the airlock, but Beck is still the one who goes out for Mark, not Commander Lewis. When Beck reaches Mark, he has 14 seconds to get him and start heading back to the ship before his tether runs out. Vogel is able to successfully pull them both in, and everyone still goes nuts. The movie ends with Mark back at NASA as an instructor of the astronaut candidate program. While the end credits are rolling, we get to see the launch of the Ares 5 mission. Martinez is going back up, and we see the Chinese astronaut too. Commander Lewis watches from home. Beck and Johansson are having a baby, and Vogel is home with his family. Mitch is no longer at NASA. The book ends very differently. Mark talks briefly about what it was like when he got back onto the ship, and then the book effectively ends. But there's a sort of chapter afterwards titled From the Files of Mark Watney. It goes back to when Mark got selected for the program, and he talks about what the training was like. There's also a letter Mark writes to his parents telling them that he was selected for the program. Mark also journals about his experience getting back to Earth and getting checked out by the doctors and psychologists and hiding from the media. He doesn't leave his home at all until he's invited to dinner with Commander Lewis. She tells him that Vogel is a chemistry professor now and that Beck and Johansson are still together. Mark tells her that he talks to Martinez regularly and his wife is having another baby. Commander Lewis says that she left NASA and is now working for a private company called Global Escape. She says they're going to build a space hotel in lower Earth orbit. She wants to recruit Mark to go and work with her, but Mark tells her that he never plans to leave Earth again. She tells him that her salary is $5 million and that she's going to reach out to the rest of the crew too. They leave it at that. But he does keep her card, leaving us to believe that he's considering it. I absolutely loved both the book and movie on this one. Matt Damon as Mark Watney was perfect, in my opinion, and I really think they got all the casting right in the movie. What I really liked about the book was how well the author explained every mechanical or scientific thing that was happening, and I feel like the book was a bit more dramatic because Mark faced so many more trials while trying to survive on Mars. I had seen the movie a little after it was released, so I knew what would be happening, and I still found myself reading the book like I couldn't wait to see what happened next. Even though I knew what was going to happen, it was still a very exciting read. So I really liked that. The movie makes Mark's space rescue really dramatic, where he nearly flies off into space, which was good, but I still haven't decided if I prefer that to the book version. I do like the way that the movie ended better than the book. I like the idea of Mark teaching at NASA much more than the idea of the crew working for a space hotel. Well, there you have it. That's my recap on The Martian by Andy Weir and the 2015 movie adaptation. Did you prefer the book or the movie? Let me know in the comments. I've included links to both the book and movie in the description below so that you can check them out too. If you enjoyed this recap, please click like and be sure to click subscribe to see my next video. Thanks for watching.